I'm actually surprised it's taken this long. Adam Schefter is reporting that Garrett Wilson is drawing trade interest from other teams. Now, I don't think the Jets are trading him, but there is a very clear message here. All right, welcome in. I want to talk a little bit about a story coming out from Adam Schefter revolving around Garrett Wilson. After Jets acquired Davante Adams, a select group of NFL teams have inquired into whether New York would be willing to trade fellow star wide receiver Garrett Wilson. Yeah, look, in other news, Ryan is also interested in Blake Lively, but guess what? It's not happening, dude. We're not trading Garrett Wilson. It's not happening. No shot in hell this is going to happen. But there was some other stuff written in this article that I did think was interesting and is at least worth a little bit more of a discussion, because I do think the Garrett Wilson situation does have an interesting tipping point at some point in the future, but I want to get into it here. This is the article from Adam Schefter. Jets star Garrett Wilson drawing trade interest, sources say. You like how I froze Tannenbaum there? The goon-picking Steelers. But let's get into this article a little bit here. After New York Jets acquired Davante Adams in a trade, teams were looking into the availability of Garrett Wilson. The Jets have heard from other teams, but are not interested or not planning to trade Wilson, according to sources. Of course not, because we're looking for a Super Bowl. It's understandable why teams would reach out to the Jets, who added talent at the wide receiver position in Davante Adams. These teams also know Wilson eventually will be in line to land the type of lucrative contract that other wide receivers have signed in recent months as the market at that position has exploded. This is talking about huge contracts. We're talking like $30+ million. I think Justin Jefferson signed a $35 million contract. CeeDee Lamb signed a monster contract. Like, literally all these dudes are coming up for contracts, and they're all like above the $30 million threshold. Teams have been willing to try to acquire Wilson with the understanding they would also be willing to pay the former first-round draft selection once he is eligible for a new contract. But that seems like a moot point for the time being, with New York planning to keep Wilson. It goes on to kind of talk about Mike Williams and the potential of him being traded, but we've already talked about that. So I want to keep this primarily on Garrett Wilson. I thought there was some interesting wording in there. Primarily the at this time, we're not interested in this at this particular point in time, or for the time being, this is a moot point. That sort of implies that there's some potential, or maybe there's maybe some rumblings that could potentially happen. This does interest me, not to trade away Garrett Wilson, but I think that it could be in his future. Now, first and foremost, teams are willing to pay him a monster contract, along with giving up the necessary assets to get him. The Jets spent the 10th overall pick on him just a few years ago, offensive rookie of the year. It makes no sense for the Jets to move this young stud. Now, as far as like what he would be getting paid, you're talking north of $30 million potentially. Right now, it's kind of hard to justify, right? Because he's gotten, about 1,000 yards each of the last 2 seasons. He's had like 8 quarterbacks in the time that he's been here. And now that he's finally, at least the last 2 weeks, have started to click with Aaron Rodgers, I think you're starting to see more and more confidence in him, staying here and being here on a longer duration with Aaron Rodgers here. I think there was definitely a point in time this year when he wasn't on the same page, and I saw Lazard, I saw Mike Williams, and you're like, oh, wow, well, those guys seem to at least be in the right place at the right time. Then the Vikings game happens, and that whole story flips, and Mike Williams is now a scrub or can't catch things or on the wrong page, and Garrett Wilson has now gone off for over 100 yards each of the last 2 weeks. So there was probably some degree of argument where, like, if you can get a monster haul for Garrett Wilson and he's not being effective because he couldn't link up with Aaron Rodgers, I could understand why teams might be poking around that. Now, the Jets, it makes no sense to move Garrett Wilson. I would not do that. I do think that Garrett Wilson does hold some leverage here. Like, obviously, teams seem to value him, whether that's coming from teams or maybe a little breadcrumbs out on the, are these breadcrumbs trying to convince Garrett Wilson that he should be getting a contract this offseason? Is it like now applying pressure to the Jets front office at some point in the offseason? Like, if I was a division rival, I'd be leaking this sort of stuff to like this type of situation, because now all of a sudden there's going to be a little bit of internal thing going on with Garrett Wilson where he's like, oh, well, yeah, I should totally get paid this offseason, even if he may not have the most productive of seasons like in total this year. Because I can understand Davante Adams having a lot more success. I could see Breece Hall having some success now that like everything's starting to get in the mold. And then obviously you got Lazard, who has a connection with Aaron Rodgers. So like numbers could be a little bit more down this year. So it's interesting. It's interesting, right? Now, I think the situation that at the end of that article, or towards the end of the portion that I read, talking about it's not the right time or it's a mute point at this time, I think there is a situation where Garrett Wilson could get traded. And it could happen as early as this offseason. I don't think, or I hope it doesn't happen this offseason. I think it all hinges on what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Garrett Wilson went through the first 2 years of his career with a young rookie quarterback in Zach Wilson, and it cost him dearly. There are 4 fifth-year options when it comes to first-round picks, and 2 of them revolve around making the playoffs. Or, not making the playoffs, making Pro Bowls. And if you think Garrett Wilson is a top 5 receiver or top 6 receiver, however many make it to the Pro Bowl in the AFC, he has lost that amount of money because Garrett Wilson sucks. That's basically what it is. So if Aaron Rodgers at the end of this season decides to hang it up and not play in 2025 because he's injured or the coaching staff gets canned or, any number of these negative outcomes, then if a new GM comes in and the Jets are trying to reset everything and Garrett Wilson doesn't want to play with a young rookie quarterback, I could totally see a situation where Garrett Wilson does eventually get moved. I just don't think that time is now. It's definitely not the time to have these discussions right now. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Big contract looming. Teams interested. I hate these stories. Guys, let me know in the comments section, what do you think about Garrett Wilson? Do you think there's a real potential that he could get traded? Probably not in season, but maybe in the offseason or in the future. Let me know in the comments section down below. And as always, go Jets.